Shut up, go. Keep your head down. Do not you dare scream, nobody is coming for you. You think you matter. You are just another black bitch in the gutter. Hold her. Hold her down. The voices sliced through the dark interior of the patrol car, brutal, mocking, laced with power. Then silence, a suffocating kind of silence, the kind that presses against the eardrums, thick and poisonous. The girl's breath rattles, shallow and panicked, her wrists straining against cold steel cuffs biting into her skin. A fist slams against metal and she jolts. Another blow, following thud, crack, grunt. Her muffled cry is swallowed by the confines of the back seat. Blood drips slow and steady, tracing a line down the corner of her mouth, the taste of iron filling her throat. Outside the window, red and blue lights blink across wet pavement, reflecting like broken glass, while shadows of boots move back and forth across the beam. Shut up, go. Keep your head down. Do not you dare scream, nobody is coming for you. You think you matter. You are just another black bitch in the gutter. Hold her. Hold her down. The voices slice through the dark interior of the patrol car, brutal, mocking, laced with power. Then silence, a suffocating kind of silence, the kind that presses against the eardrums, thick and poisonous. The girl's breath rattles, shallow and panicked, her wrists straining against cold steel cuffs biting into her skin. A fist slams against metal and she jolts. Another blow, following thud, crack, grunt. Her muffled cry is swallowed by the confines of the back seat. Blood drips slow and steady, tracing a line down the corner of her mouth, the taste of iron filling her throat. Outside the window, red and blue lights blink across wet pavement, reflecting like broken glass, while shadows of boots move back and forth across the beam. One officer laughs, sharp and ugly. Another whispers close to her ear, breath sour with cigarette. The words are not loud, but they carve deeper than fists. No one's saving you. Not tonight. The air inside the car grows heavy, suffocating. Her heartbeat pounds louder than the sirens, louder than the fists, louder than the curses. And then sudden quiet. The violence stops, cut off like a switch. The only sound left is her ragged breathing, the wet choke of blood sliding down her throat. A car door creaks open. Cold night air rushes in. Boots scrape against the asphalt. 1, 2, slow, deliberate steps. Then nothing, just silence. The silence of a life already sealed in shadows. Silence, the kind that lingers long after the violence has ended. But rewind the tape. Push back before the blood, before the boots on wet pavement. Her life was not made of screams. It was made of mornings. The sun had risen hot that day, spilling across the cracked concrete lot of the neighborhood car wash. Hose water sprayed in arcs, glittering in the light. Radios hummed low, static giving way to faint R&B crooning through old speakers. The girl stood in the middle of it, bright yellow bucket in hand, sleeves rolled to her elbows, laughing. She was small, but strong, hard-working, always moving. She scrubbed at the hood of a dented Chevy, foam streaking across the windshield. When the boy next to her missed a spot, she flicked suds onto his shirt, grinning when he cursed under his breath. Gotta keep up, slowpoke, she teased, eyes sharp but playful. That was her rhythm, hard work laced with humor. She wasn't rich, not even close, but she carried warmth, an energy that made the ordinary shine. Customers tipped her not because she asked, but because they wanted to. She had a way of making people feel seen. By late afternoon, the lot smelled of soap, rubber, and cheap fried food drifting from a vendor cart down the street. Children rode past on bikes, shrieking with laughter. The girl wiped sweat from her forehead, streaking it with suds, then dunked her rag back into the water. When evening fell, she walked home with the faint smell of gasoline still clinging to her hands. The small apartment she shared with her brother was cluttered, lived in plastic bags of groceries piled on the counter, a cracked TV buzzing low. Dinner was simple. Greasy takeout in cardboard boxes, grease stains spreading like ink across the table. But there was laughter. There was comfort. Her brother sat across from her, broad shoulders, tired eyes, the kind of man who lived with weight pressing on him, weight most people never saw. His name carried whispers in the neighborhood, Mafia ties that made enemies cautious. But at the table he was not a gangster. He was her brother, protective, watchful. She teased him for the way he wolfed down food, and he shot back with mock threats. But his gaze lingered on her, always as though he was memorizing her face, her smile, the curve of her hand lifting a soda can. Outside the window, music drifted from a neighbor's stereo. Kids played tag on the sidewalk, their footsteps echoing between brick walls. A stray dog barked, chasing shadows. It was ordinary life, imperfect, fragile, human, and yet beneath the hum of normalcy, threads of unease wove in. Because sometimes, when she walked home, The same squad car slowed near the corner. The same pale faces watching from inside. The officers didn't smile, didn't wave. They just lingered, windows down, radio chatter bleeding into the night air. That night, she noticed it again. A black and white parked across the street as she and her brother carried their trash out. The headlights blinked once, then turned away. She frowned, shifting uncomfortably. He noticed. He always noticed. "You good?" he asked, voice low. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't press, but his eyes stayed hard, tracing the shape of the patrol car disappearing into the dark. Later, as she curled into bed, soft music whispering from her phone. The sound of tires on pavement rolled faintly through the window. She closed her eyes, tried to ignore it, tried to hold on to the warmth of laughter, the taste of fried chicken, the rhythm of soap and water and sunshine, because life still felt safe, still felt hers. But the silence waiting for her was already gathering in the dark. The night air was colder than usual. A damp chill crept along the sidewalks, clinging to her skin as she left the corner store with a plastic bag swinging at her side. Chips, a soda, cheap candy. Nothing special, just something sweet before bed. But something felt off. She slowed, adjusting the strap of her bag. The street was nearly empty, just the faint buzz of a flickering street lamp and the low hum of a television drifting from a second-floor window. Her sneakers slapped against the concrete in steady rhythm. But her chest felt tight, like the air itself was pressing too close. A car rolled by at the far end of the block. Headlights swept across her, then vanished. She exhaled, shaking it off. Paranoia, that's all. But the cameras caught it. The grainy feed from the liquor store's security system showed her glancing over her shoulder, pausing beneath the broken lamp. Behind her, shadows stretched long across the pavement, elongated by headlights creeping back into view. The footage had no sound, but anyone watching would swear they heard her breath quicken. The patrol car slowed, then stopped. 2 doors opened. "Hey," a voice called. Too casual, too sharp. "Where you headed, sweetheart?" She froze. Plastic bag rustled in her grip. "I asked you a question." Boots scuffed the pavement. The sound of authority, of ownership. She swallowed hard. "Home." Laugh. Cruel, echoing in the empty street. "Nah, home's wherever we say it is." They're closed in. One circled behind her, the other blocking her path. Their shadows stretched long, devouring hers. The bag slipped from her hand. Candy spilled across the sidewalk. Her breath hitched. "Please, I didn't do anything." A hand clamped down on her shoulder, hard enough to bruise. She stumbled, tried to pull free. Another hand grabbed her wrist. The sound of metal cuffs snapped open, sharp and final. She thrashed. Nails scraped against one man's arm, leaving red streaks. His response was instant, a backhand, knuckles splitting her lip, blood running hot down her chin. "Resisting," he hissed. "You resisting arrest?" The street was empty, windows shut, no witnesses. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Too fast, too loud. She gasped for air as they forced her toward the car. Her shoes squealed against the pavement, dragging. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by night. Surveillance footage caught the blur of movement. Her arm bent wrong, twisted behind her back. Her body shoved against the hood of the cruiser. Her face pressed into cold metal. Blood smeared across the surface. They were laughing, one muffled by the grind of his teeth, the other harsh and guttural. Her nails clawed desperately at the hood. The screech of keratin against steel. Skin split. Blood welled beneath her fingertips, staining the white paint in streaks. She begged. Voice breaking, breath choking, words tripping over sobs. No one answered. Fabric tore, the sound obscene in its sharpness. Cold night air bit at exposed skin. Their weight crushed her against the hood, ribs compressing, lungs struggling for space. Every gasp shallower than the last. Her vision blurred. Light smeared into streaks of red and blue from the cruiser's flashes. The world narrowed to fragments, boots pressing into asphalt. The metallic taste of blood pooling at the back of her throat. The smell of sweat and gasoline. Her body convulsed once, then weakened. Nails scraped weaker lines across the hood, then weaker still, until finally they stopped moving altogether. Her breathing faltered, thin as thread. Inhalations rattling, exhalations broken by wet coughs. Then silence, the kind that doesn't fade, it smothers. The officers stepped back, straightening uniforms, breath heavy, eyes darting down the deserted street. One pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lit it with shaking hands. The other wiped blood from his knuckles onto his pant leg. No words, no remorse. Just silence between them, broken only by the faint click of the lighter and the slow drip of blood sliding down the side of the cruiser. They shoved her body into the back seat, limbs limp, head lolling to one side. Her hair stuck to her cheek, dark strands matted with sweat and blood. The car doors slammed shut, the headlights blinked once, twice, then the cruiser pulled away, tires hissing against wet asphalt. The surveillance camera kept rolling, capturing nothing but an empty street, candy scattered across the sidewalk, a torn bag caught in the wind. The silence swallowed everything. The silence did not stay on the street, it followed her into the system. By morning, the official story was already written. Female suspect resisted arrest, became aggressive. Officers subdued her. Possible narcotics involvement. Words printed in neat black ink, sterile and precise. No mention of torn fabric. No mention of blood smeared across the hood of a cruiser. No mention of the way her breathing had rattled and then stopped. The police report made her into a caricature, a threat, not a daughter, not a sister, just another incident. The district attorney signed off on it before lunch. His pen scratched across the page, indifferent. Another file in a stack that never stopped growing. To him, it was procedure, nothing more. The weight of a life reduced to a few checked boxes. Bodycam footage should have told the truth. But somehow, the cameras had all malfunctioned. Battery errors, corrupted files. One officer swore his lens had been covered in mud. Another insisted the unit was not activated. For different men, for different excuses, all accepted without question. Autopsy came next. The examiner's hands moved methodically, gloves snapping, scalpels slicing. But the report was already decided. Cause of death, accidental overdose, her lungs filled with blood, did not matter. The bruises ringing her wrists did not matter. The examiner noted what he was told to note. The rest was erased. A small bag of cocaine appeared among her belongings. Not real, not hers. But now, a permanent part of her record. Evidence found tucked into her jacket pocket. It gave the story shape. It gave the lies weight. At the press conference, the police chief's voice was calm, practiced. He spoke of tragic circumstances, of another young life destroyed by drugs. He praised the officers for their restraint under duress. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Not one question about the missing footage. Not one question about the bruises. Local news ran the headline within the hour. Black woman dies after resisting arrest's possible drug overdose. Her name was buried beneath the story. Just 3 words that slid past the ticker on evening broadcasts. Her face replaced by a mugshot pulled from an old jaywalking citation, dark lighting turning her eyes hollow. Not the girl who scrubbed cars with a smile. Not the sister who laughed over greasy food. The system had scrubbed her clean of innocence. On the streets, the community whispered a different truth. They had seen the cruiser. They had heard the screams echo through alleys. But whispers do not fill headlines. Whispers do not survive paperwork. Protests flickered like candlelight. A handful of neighbors gathered outside the station, holding signs made of cardboard and ink that smeared when the rain fell. Justice for her, we see you. Their chants rose into the night, angry roar, desperate. But the sound was drowned by silence. Sirens blared to scatter them. Cars passed without slowing. News crews pointed their cameras elsewhere. Inside the precinct, officers shared coffee, joked about sports, filed their reports. Not one mention of the protests. Not one acknowledgement that a life had been taken. Her brother read the story in silence. His hands trembled as the words scrolled across his phone. Overdose, resisting. The lies bled into his eyes until he could not see straight. He knew the truth. The streets knew the truth. But the truth was already buried under signatures, stamps, and silence. She had been erased, not just from the night, not just from the report, but from history. A statistic, a file number, a body boxed and labeled. And yet silence never stays silent. It grows, it spreads, it becomes something else. The silence grew teeth. It followed him into the apartment, gnawed at the edges of every room, every object, every breath. Her shoes were still by the doormud crusted on the soles, laces frayed from work. Her jacket hung over the back of a chair, the faint smell of detergent and soap still clinging to it. The bed she slept in was unmade, sheets twisted, pillow dented from her head. But she was gone. Her brother sat at the table, head in his hands, a bottle of whiskey bleeding amber across the wood. His hands trembled, thick fingers unable to stay still. He poured too much, spilled more than he drank, the liquid spreading into stains that darkened like bruises. Nights did not pass anymore, they bled into each other. Hours stretched and snapped like rubber bands. He lay awake on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan as it spun shadows across the walls. Every blink brought her face. Every silence brought her voice. Every creak of the building made his pulse spike. Sleep never stayed. When it came, it was jagged. Dreams filled with flashing lights, blood dripping on concrete, muffled screams bouncing off car doors. He woke with his chest heaving, sweat pouring, lungs fighting for air. The sound of his own breathing became unbearable, too loud, too desperate. He held it sometimes, just to feel the pressure build, the burn that reminded him of what she must have felt in those final moments. They killed her. The words left his mouth once rasped into the empty room. He did not repeat them. He did not need to. They etched themselves into the walls, into the silence, into the very air. His paranoia grew roots. Every sound outside the apartment door set him on edge. He stood at the window for hours, watching headlights crawl across the street. Every police car that passed sent fire through his veins. His hand twitched toward the pistol under the couch cushion. Safety always off, ready. But rage had nowhere to go. Not yet. He thought of her laughter, how she teased him for eating too fast, how she flicked soap at her coworkers, how she sang along to songs that skipped on the radio. He thought of her hands scrubbing, cleaning, creating, hands that had built a life out of nothing, hands that had clawed at steel in her final moments. He thought of his own hands, wide, heavy, made for breaking bones, hands that had carried weight, signed deals in shadows, left marks on men who crossed him. He had promised her those hands would never touch her world, that his life in the Mafia would never stain hers. Now, the promise mocked him. The conflict tore at his chest, left him raw. Revenge meant death. Death in prison. Death in the streets. Death in every way that mattered. But inaction meant betrayal. To do nothing was to let her be buried twice, once in the ground, once in lies. His world tilted between those two absolutes, a pendulum swinging too fast, too sharp. He drank to dull it. He smoked until the room filled with fog. But nothing muted the voice in his head, the silence pressing against his ears, the image of her face lifeless in the back of a cruiser. Some nights, he sat in her room, staring at the bed. He traced the patterns in the blanket with his fingertips, as if mapping her absence. He inhaled deeply, trying to catch the faintest trace of her scent soap shampoo, the cheap lotion she always borrowed. When it faded, he pressed his palms to his eyes until stars burst in the darkness. The shadows moved differently now. Corners of the room pulsed with shapes that were not there. Sometimes he swore he saw her standing at the end of the hall, hair loose, eyes wide, lips parted, as if to speak. But she never did. The silence always swallowed her before sound could form. He whispered apologies to the dark, for not protecting her, for letting the world touch her, for choosing a life that left him powerless when it mattered most. And still, the silence answered. Breathing became a motif in his life. He counted each inhale, each exhale, as if they were borrowed from her. Sometimes he stopped on purpose, letting the burn climb, the pressure mount. He wanted to know how long he could last before the body begged for air. He never made it long enough. The panic always forced him to gasp, chest heaving, hands clutching his knees. Whiskey never softened it. Pills did not either. Nothing muted the image of her nails scraping paint, leaving bloody trails. He wanted to believe in justice, to believe in courts, in lawyers, in appeals, but the system had already written her out. The DA's signature had buried her deeper than any grave, so he stared at himself in the mirror, at the bags under his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the veins pulsing in his temple. He asked the question aloud once, "What am I without her?" The mirror gave no answer, only silence, but deep in his chest, something shifted, something heavy, black, rising like smoke from a fire that refused to die. It was not just grief anymore. It was hunger, not for peace, not for forgiveness, for reckoning. The hunger for reckoning needed a shape, a target, a face. The men who took her were not shadows anymore. They had names, they had lives, and the brother began to see them everywhere, in whispers, in files, in the quiet networks of a city that always knew more than it said. The first one lived in a quiet suburban house with pale shutters and a manicured lawn. A wife, 2 children, dinner at 6. He played the role well. Smiling father, dutiful husband. Neighbors waved when he backed his car out of the driveway. But beneath the smile, unease twitched. His hand shook when he lit the grill. His eyes darted toward the blinds whenever a siren wailed in the distance. At night, when the house fell silent, he sat in the dark with a glass of bourbon, staring at his own reflection in the window. He told himself he had no choice, that she fought back, that he only followed orders. But the lie never dulled the memory, the sound of her breath rattling against steel. The blood streaked across his knuckles. He scrubbed his hands raw sometimes, as if skin could forget, but the red always came back in dreams. The second one was different, loud, reckless. He did not hide. He the kind of man who filled a bar with noise the moment he walked in. Dice rattling, poker chips, stacked. smoke curling from cheap cigars. He laughed too hard, drank too much, gambled with money that was not his. The other men did not trust him, but they tolerated him because corruption always protects its own. He wore his violence like a medal. He boasted about arrests that left men broken, about cleaning up the streets, about teaching people their place. But when the liquor settled, when his bravado slipped, the cracks showed, his jaw clenched, his laughter thinned, his hands trembled just enough that he shoved them into his pockets, hiding the shake. He knew what he had done. He knew it would not stay buried forever. The third one sought refuge in faith. Sundays found him kneeling at the front pew of a small church, lips moving in silent prayer. He clasped a rosary so tight it left impressions on his palms. He whispered confessions that never left the walls. He asked for forgiveness he knew he did not deserve, but the fear clung to him. He felt it in the pit of his stomach when the priest laid a hand on his shoulder. He felt it in the stillness of the sanctuary when stained glass poured colored light across his face. He tried to drown it in scripture, but the words slid past him like water. No verse could wash away the sound of her nails scraping metal, the memory of the weight they had pressed against her body until her voice broke. At home, he avoided his wife's eyes. He jumped at small noises, the slam of a car door, the crack of thunder. His faith was a shield, but it was cracking, and beneath it, guilt festered like rot. These men were not monsters born in darkness. They were products of the system that fed them, uniforms stitched from power and immunity. They moved through the city like everyone else, eating, drinking, praying, laughing, but the rot lived under their skin, poisoning everything they touched. The brother studied them from the shadows, the suburban father with the trembling hands, the reckless gambler spilling whiskey across poker tables, the devout believer clutching beads until his knuckles whitened. Each of them walked freely. Each of them carried on, their world intact, their families safe, their lives untouched by the blood they had spilled, and yet, none of them were at peace. The cracks were there, small but widening. Shadows clung to them like second skins. Their breaths faltered when silence fell too heavy. Their eyes flicked toward every dark corner, every pair of headlights, every stranger who stared a moment too long. They did not know it yet, but their silence had already been broken. Their reckoning had already begun. The hunger hardened. Grief had chewed him raw, hollowed him out until nothing remained but silence and rage. But now, silence gave way to movement. Rage demanded direction. The brother began to change. The transformation did not happen all at once. It unfolded in fragments, in rituals that grew darker by the night. He started with the walls. Maps spread across them, taped crooked, their corners curling from damp air. Photographs stolen from files, printed from whispers, burned into his eyes. 3 faces pinned with needles, red strings stretched between them like vein solderies of vengeance pulsing in the dark. On the table, notebooks filled with encrypted codes, not words, not sentences, but numbers and symbols only he could decipher. Lists of movements, schedules, bars frequented, churches visited, families tucked into houses at night. He mapped their lives the way hunters map prey. Burner phones lined up like soldiers. SIM cards switched, crushed, replaced. Calls made only in code, if at all. Allies from his old world, the underbelly. The shadows passed him scraps of information without asking questions. They knew better than to ask. The apartment became a bunker. Curtains pinned shut, locks reinforced, windows covered in blackout film. On the floor, weapons laid out with surgical precision. Pistols stripped and cleaned. Knives sharpened until their edges whispered against stone. A length of cord coiled neatly. Duct tape folded into squares. Tools not just of violence, but of control. He moved like a machine now, awake when the city slept, silent when the world stirred. The insomnia that had once broken him became his ally. Every sleepless night was a step closer to them, and yet hesitation still gnawed. Each time he stared at the photographs, her face appeared between them, her smile, her laugh, her eyes wide with teasing light. She had begged him once, "Stay out of trouble, do not bring your world into mine." But trouble had come anyway, and it had taken her. Now, there was no line left to protect. The first strike came on a Thursday night. The suburban father, the one with trembling hands, had left his house late, claiming overtime to his wife. He drove alone, streets nearly empty, rain starting to fall in thin sheets. Street lamps blinked overhead, their lights sickly and weak, flickering against puddles. The brother followed from a distance, headlights dimmed. The engine purred low, patient. His breathing matched the rhythm of the windshield wipers. Inhale, exhale, swipe, return. The officer pulled into a small parking lot behind a strip mall, killing his lights. He sat there, hands gripping the wheel, forehead pressed against the leather. He thought he was alone. He was not. The Avenger moved silent, steps muffled by wet asphalt. A hood shadowed his face, rain dripping from the brim. In his hand, the pistol stayed low, blackened tape around the grip. For a moment, he hesitated. The weight of the weapon, the pulse in his hand, the sound of rain against metal. He could still turn back. He could still pretend justice would find its way through courts, appeals, protests. But then he saw it, the blinking light of a dying street lamp overhead. Flicker, dark, flicker again. Weak, gasping, fading. Just like her breath. Just like his faith in the system. The hesitation dissolved. He yanked open the car door. The officer jolted, eyes wide, mouth forming words that never came. The barrel pressed against his temple. Silence heavier than any scream filled the car. They killed her. The words left the brother's mouth, flat, final. The officer tried to speak, lips quivering. He raised his hands, palms trembling. The shot cut him off. One pull, one flash, one sound, then silence. The officer's body slumped sideways, blood painting the seat, the dashboard, dripping onto the floor mat. His eyes stared blank, wide, as if still searching for forgiveness that would never come. The brother stepped back, gun still warm in his hand. His breathing came sharp, shallow, uneven. The rain fell harder, washing blood toward the drain, streaking red across the asphalt. This was it, the point of no return. There would be no going back to grief, to silence, to waiting. The system had erased her, but he would write her story in blood. He pulled the door shut, wiped the handle clean, and disappeared into the dark. The street lamp flickered once more, then died completely, leaving the lot in shadow. The first body did not shake the city. It jolted it. News broke the following morning. Crisp anchors delivering with neutral tones. An off-duty officer found dead in what appears to be a targeted shooting. Investigators are pursuing leads of gang involvement. Not murder, not vengeance, not justice, gang violence. The narrative hardened within hours. Headlines repeated it. Unknown suspect, gang retaliation, officer victim of ongoing criminal turf war. Her name was never mentioned. The connection was never drawn. Inside the precinct, the silence was louder than the chatter. Officers avoided eye contact, muttered among themselves, shifted their weight when his name surfaced. But in official statements, they closed ranks. No mention of misconduct, no whisper of guilt, just brotherhood. One of their own, fallen. For the brother, it was confirmation. The system would protect itself to the last breath. They had turned his sister into a statistic. Now they would turn their own into martyrs. But the act had changed him. He moved through the city differently. Every shadow seemed alive. Every passing car, every flicker of blue lights on distant walls, every echo of boots on pavement, they all pressed closer. He breathed heavier at night, the sound filling the apartment until he thought the walls would collapse. He kept his pistol near always, safety off. Yet in that pressure, he sharpened. His grief was no longer raw chaos. It was discipline. He stalked the second man, the reckless gambler, through the city's underbelly. The officer lived loud, but he also lived sloppy. Bars, dice tables, smoke curling thick above him. The brother trailed him across nights, through neon signs and flickering bulbs, until he learned the rhythms. When he drank too much, when he stumbled out to piss in alleys, when he whispered threats to waitresses who refused him. The strike came sudden. An alley behind a bar, neon buzzing overhead, rain dripping from gutters. The officer staggered, lighting a cigarette, the flame illuminating his face just enough. A shadow moved. The gun pressed to his side. He gasped, turned, mouth open to shout, but the brother's hand clamped his throat. Crushing sound. Their eyes met. For a moment, the officer's bravado cracked. The laughter, the swagger all gone. He saw what was coming. "You remember her?" the brother hissed. The officer tried to speak, could not. His breath came sharp, broken. The shot rang muffled against his ribs. He folded, crumpling into the rain, cigarette still burning in his hand as it dropped to the puddle. The ember hissed out. The silence returned, heavy final, but outside the alley, life kept moving. Music thumped from bars. Cars splashed water onto sidewalks. Protest chants drifted faintly from a nearby street neighbor still crying her name. Voices muffled by the city's indifference. The brother walked away. But shadows followed, because vengeance does not move unseen. His allies, those who once whispered information, who passed names and schedules, began to withdraw. Calls went unanswered, meetings cancelled. Old friends from the Mafia world muttered excuses. Too hot, too close. The cops are watching everything now. One confidant met him in a dim garage, voice low, face pale. "They will come for you next," he warned. Not just the cops. The DA, the feds. They will bury you. They do not care about her, they care about their own. And you are picking them off. The brother said nothing, just breathed heavy, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. You cannot keep this up. You will burn us all. But silence answered again. The killings grew whispers in the city, on corners, in bars, behind closed doors, rumors of an avenger, of a man cutting through the blue wall. But officially, gang war. Always gang war. The media painted blood with broad strokes. Every headline twisted. Every anchor recited lines fed from press releases. Protesters shouted outside stations, their chants rising. Say her name. Say her name. But broadcasts cut away. Footage cropped signs to half-visible slogans. The brother watched it all from the dark of his apartment, chest heaving, breath loud in the silence. He was not erasing her memory, he was carving it deeper. Even if no one said her name, the blood would speak for her. The third Mantha believer was hardest. He moved carefully. His fear drove him into ritual. Church at dawn, mass at night, home in between. His hands clutched rosaries until the beads dug grooves into his skin. The brother followed him into sanctuaries where candles flickered and stained glass bled color across stone floors. He watched him kneel, lips moving, forehead pressed, two hands. He listened to prayers whispered into silence. And yet, beneath the devotion, fear bled through. The officer's breath quickened when doors creaked. His shoulders hunched at the sound of boots. He looked over his shoulder too often, too sharply. He was already haunted. The brother's presence was the shadow he could not shake. Weeks passed in stalking, watching, waiting. Hesitation lingered not for the man, but for the place. A church. A sanctuary. She had once lit candles too, whispered prayers into quiet nights. He feared tainting that memory with blood, but the blinking lights followed him here too. One night, as the officer left mass, a street lamp flickered above the church steps. On, off, on, off. The brother saw it as a sign. He struck. The officer barely reached his car before the shadow fell over him. A hand gripped the back of his neck, slammed him against the door. His rosary snapped, beads scattering across pavement. His breath came rapid, desperate. God will not save you, the brother whispered. The man shook his head, tears cutting lines through the grime on his cheeks. Please. The gun pressed against his chest. A single shot. Silence swallowed the church steps. The candles inside flickered, but no one came out. 3 men, 3 lives taken, and yet the brother felt no peace, only weight. Only the sound of his own lungs dragging air. Only the silence pressing closer. The system tightened in response. Patrols doubled. Task forces formed. Press conferences delivered promises of swift justice. Not for her, for them. For the men who had worn uniforms. The city seemed to turn against him. Not directly, never directly. But in whispers. In the way neighbors shut blinds faster. In the way allies slipped into the dark and never came back. He was becoming untouchable, but also alone. The silence followed closer now. In his apartment, in alleys, in churches, he carried it with him, a shadow heavier than blood. And always, always, his breathing, loud, labored, echoing against walls that seemed to close tighter every night. The system resisted him, but it could not stop him, not yet, because he had already crossed the line where return was impossible. And the silence still demanded more. The silence was thicker now. It followed him like a second shadow, crawling into every corner of his nights. He had taken 3 lives, each with its own ritual, each marked by blood and breath and the final weight of silence. But the hunger had not left. It had sharpened, narrowed, until only one remained. The last cop, the one who had held her down hardest, the one who laughed the loudest, the one who thought the badge meant he was untouchable. The brother found him hiding, not in a home or a church, but in a decaying warehouse on the edge of the city. A place where steel beams rusted and glass lay shattered across the floor, where every drip of water echoed like a clock ticking down. The officer was not alone. He had brought a gun, a flashlight, a paranoia that crackled in every step he took across the broken concrete. He knew death was coming. He just did not know when. The brother stalked him through the dark, silent, patient. The smell of rust and oil filled his lungs. His breath sounded too loud in his own ears, every inhale dragging, every exhale sharp. His heart thudded heavy, matching the officer's jittery footsteps. A flashlight beam swept across the warehouse, slicing the dark into jagged pieces. Dust particles danced in the cone of light. The officer's voice cracked as he muttered to himself, "You are not real. You are not coming for me." But his words rang hollow. Then, the silence broke. A bottle shifted underfoot. The officer spun, flashlight snapping toward the sound. The beam caught the brother's face for half a second, eyes hollow, jaw tight, pistol raised. Gunfire exploded. The first shot shattered a window, glass raining down like brittle stars. The second tore into a beam, sparks bursting. The officer screamed, diving behind a stack of crates, breath ragged, chest heaving. The brother did not rush. He moved methodically, boots crunching on glass, gun steady. The silence between shots felt heavier than the violence itself. The officer fired blindly, bullets ricocheting off steel, echoing like thunder. "Stay back," he shouted, voice breaking. "I will kill you." But the words had no weight. They dissolved into the warehouse air, drowned by the sound of his own panic. The brother circled, closing the gap, each step deliberate, each inhale controlled. The blinking light of a dying bulb overhead flickered in rhythm with his approach. On, off, like a heartbeat, like her last breaths. The officer lunged from cover, firing again. The bullet grazed the brother's arm, tearing fabric, burning flesh. Pain flared, sharp and electric, but he did not falter. He rushed forward, slamming into the man, both of them crashing into a wall of crates. Wood splintered. The flashlight clattered to the ground, spinning, beam strobing across broken glass. They grappled, fists slamming, teeth grinding, breath hot and ragged. The officer's punches landed wild, fueled by fear. The brothers' strikes were colder, heavier, deliberate. Each one cracked bone, split skin, drew blood. The struggle spilled into the light of the broken window. Rain poured in, mixing with sweat and blood, streaking their faces. The officer's hand clawed for his gun, but the brother caught his wrist, twisting until bones snapped with a sickening crack. The weapon fell, clattering against concrete. They froze for a moment, chest to chest, breath against breath. The brother caught his reflection in a shard of broken glass at his feet. His face was unrecognizable, eyes black with fury, lips curled, skin smeared with blood. For a moment he saw himself as the monster, not an avenger, not a brother, a mirror of the very men he hunted. The officer saw it too. His eyes widened, tears cutting through dirt and blood. "You're just like us," he rasped. The words cut deeper than any wound. For a heartbeat, hesitation cracked the brother's resolve. His hands trembled, his lungs stuttered. The silence pressed harder, demanding an answer. But then he remembered her pressed against steel, nails clawing, breath choking, eyes pleading. He remembered the sound of her life ending under their weight, and hesitation burned away. The final blow was brutal. A knife drawn from his belt plunged deep. The officer's scream echoed once, sharp and broken, before it collapsed into gurgling silence. His body convulsed, then stilled. Blood spread across the concrete, running into cracks, pooling under the broken glass. The flickering bulb sputtered once more, then went out completely, plunging the warehouse into darkness. The brother stood there, chest heaving, breath ragged. His hands dripped red. His arm burned from the graze, his knuckles swollen and raw. The silence after the violence pressed heavier than the act itself. It was over, but victory tasted like ashes. The warehouse echoed with his breathing, loud, uneven, broken. He looked at his reflection again in the glass at his feet, his sister's avenger. Yes, but also something else. Something hollow, something monstrous. He had one, but nothing about it felt like victory. The silence swallowed him whole. Afterwards, the warehouse never left him. He carried the silence from its broken windows into the streets, into the shadows, into the small hours of mornings when the city stirred, but he did not. His sister's killers were gone, buried not by courts but by his hands. Justice, if the word still meant anything, had been delivered. And yet, peace never came. The streets filled with noise now. Protest swelled louder than before, swelling with grief, anger, and memory. Cardboard signs lifted above heads. Say her name. Justice. No more silence. Her face painted in bold strokes across brick walls, colors bleeding together in murals lit by candles at night. Candlelight vigils stretched across corners where police cars once lingered. Children clutched flowers. Mothers held photographs. Chants rose into the dark, rolling like thunder against the facades of silent buildings. And still the media clipped the edges. Broadcasts called them unrest. Reporters framed the candles as chaos, the murals as vandalism. Cameras flickered, cutting footage into glitchy fragments, as if even machines conspired to erase her name. But her name lived in whispers, in chants, in murals that refused to fade. The brother never joined the crowds. He watched from the edges, hood drawn low, breath heavy. His chest rose and fell as chants filled the air, his lungs aching under the weight of memory. He stayed in alleys, on rooftops, behind fences, always apart, because he was not one of them anymore. He had given them justice, but he had lost his humanity in the exchange. At night, he returned to the apartment. The maps still hung on the walls, but the string sagged now, limp with finality. Photographs curled at the edges, their faces crossed out in red. On the table, his tools lay untouched. The pistols, the knives, the burner phone silent like relics of a life already finished. He stared into mirrors that no longer gave him back his face. One was cracked, a jagged line splitting his reflection down the middle. On one side, he saw the brother who had once laughed over greasy food with his sister. On the other, he saw the avenger, hollow-eyed, hands stained red. Neither felt real. Sometimes he lit a candle for her, just one, the flame trembling as if it too carried fear. He watched it burn lower, wax spilling down the sides, smoke curling. Each night, he let it burn until nothing remained but melted wax and the faint scent of smoke. The silence after the flame died pressed heavier than the dark. He dreamed of her often, not whole, not smiling, but in fragments. Nails clawing steel, breath rattling, eyes wide, pleading. The warehouse bled into the cruiser into the church into his own bedroom. He woke with his chest convulsing, lungs dragging air too loud, too heavy. The protests grew louder. The city convulsed with marches, chants, sirens. Blinking lights cut across the night red, blue-white flashing in rhythm like her final breaths. The brother saw them through rain-slick windows, across alleys, reflected in puddles, always flickering, always fading. The footage of the protests glitched on television. Cameras shook, audio fractured, screens cutting to static before chants could swell to clear. But in those brief moments, in the glitch between frames, her name burned bright. Her face stared back from murals painted on brick, defiant against silence. He wanted to join, to step into the crowd, to lift his voice. But he couldn't. His hands were no longer clean. His breath no longer belonged to the living. He had crossed into blood, and there was no path back. One night, he stood in the shadows across from a vigil. Candles lit the street, their flames trembling against the wind. The chants rolled low, steady, like a heartbeat. Someone had painted her face on the wall behind them, eyes bright, lips curved, alive in color though dead in truth. The brother pressed his back to the bricks, sliding down until he sat in the dark. His chest rose and fell, each breath jagged, too loud. He pressed his palms against his face, but the silence pressed harder, suffocating. He realized then what he had become. Justice had been achieved. The system had been cut open, its rot exposed. But the cost was him. His soul traded for silence. His humanity consumed by blood. He was no longer a brother, not really. Not a man, not a monster. Something in between. A shadow stitched together by grief and vengeance. The mirror cracked. The candle burned down. The silence stretched. The city moved on, as cities always do. New headlines, new chaos, new names buried in files. But her murals stayed. Her chants lingered. Her story refused to vanish. And in the dark, the brother remained, alone, watching, haunted. Was it worth it? The question gnawed, unanswered. The silence swallowed everything. Shut up, girl. Keep your head down. The words returned not from the officers now, but from the silence itself. Echoes bouncing in his skull, cruel, endless, looping back to where it all began. In the end, it was never about bullets or knives, not about red string maps or blood on warehouse floors. It was about those words, the abuse of power, the silence that followed, the breath stolen, the laughter erased. He had answered them with vengeance. He had carved their names into blood and concrete. But the echoes remained. They always would. The city marched on. Candles burned. Murals glowed. Protest chants rose, glitching through the static of televisions and the blindness of media. But in the shadows, he listened only to silence. And the silence, heavy as ever, whispered back the truth. There is no triumph here. Only reckoning. Only ashes. Only silence. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, and share, and stay tuned for more stories.